Extraordinary Gazette issues 2 new ministries. Appoint Ranil to National List seat in Parliament. UNP representatives make a request. Akila Virat steps down as UNP General Secretary. Ex-parte enjoining order against MTV Channel Private Limited for reportage on the importation of rapid antigen test kits to Sri Lanka by George Stewart Health Private Limited. Schools reopen in several areas. Teachers' unions further question about students' safety. Fund allocation for health security criticized. Overseas travel ban on Basil Rajpaksa lifted by Colombo High Court.
Hello there and a very good evening. You're watching Primetime News on TV1. For the News First team, I'm Dasnia Palder, along with our interpreter tonight, Brian De Cruz, who is joining us via Zoom. Starting off with your top story, 2 new cabinet ministries have been established under an extraordinary gazette published by the President. They are the Ministry of Technology and the Ministry of Public Security. Accordingly, the number of cabinet ministries will be increased to 30. The extraordinary gazette dated the 20th of November 2020 has made amendments to the duties and functions of ministries as well. According to the Gazette, the police and the Department of Civil Security have been brought under the Ministry of Public Security. They were previously under the State Ministry of Internal Security, Home Affairs and Disaster Management. The Department of Registration of Persons, that was also under the State Ministry, has been reassigned to the Ministry of Technology. Meanwhile, the subjects of national priority that come under the purview of the President has also been amended. Accordingly, the Presidential Task Force to prevent COVID-19 infection among members of the Tri-Forces, the Presidential Task Force to build a secure country, disciplined, virtuous and lawful society, the COVID-19 Ministerial Task Force, the Presidential Task Force for Archaeological Heritage Management in the Eastern Province, the Presidential Task Force on Sri Lanka's Education Affairs and the Presidential Task Force for Poverty Eradication and Livelihood Development that have been included in the list of national priorities. The Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, Information and Communication Technology Agency and the Sri Lanka Computer Emergency Readiness Team that were previously on the list of national priorities have been brought under the Ministry of Technology. The Gazette also declares that the Mahapola Higher Education Scholarship Trust Fund has been brought under the purview of the Trade Ministry.
Meanwhile, opposition MP Anudu Kumar Disanayake commented on the newly established ministries during the committee stage debate of the 2021 budget in Parliament today.
The committee stage debate of the 2021 budget will commence today. Against such a backdrop, 2 ministries have been established on the 20th. 8 institutions have been brought under the purview of the Presidential Secretariat. 10 institutions have been brought under the Defence Minister, 10 institutions under the Minister of Technology and 4 under the Minister of Public Security. Altogether, 32 institutions will be under the purview of the President, who will not be held accountable to Parliament. How can we debate on matters in this regard in Parliament in the future? This reveals the President's view about Parliament. The debate on the budget is not relevant to him. Allocations have been made to expenditure heads, but such matters are irrelevant. The Gazette published on Friday is proof of this.
මේකෙදි කැබිනට් සංශෝධනයක් ගැන කතා වෙනවා ගැසට් එක නිකුත් කරලා තියනවා කියලා කියනවා මේ කැබිනට් සංශෝධනය.
The decision regarding a cabinetary shuffle can only be taken by the President. We cannot make any statement in this regard. The President will look into such matters.
කරන්න බෑ ඒ ජනාධිපතිතුමා විසින් නෑ ගැසට් එකක් නිකුත් කරලා තියනවා කියනවා ඒ සම්බන්ධව දැනුවත්ද? අපි ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් දැනුවත් නැහැ.
The committee stage on the budget 2021 or the third reading debate commenced today. Expenditure heads of public services, including the President and the Prime Minister's office, were taken up for debate today. Here are some of the views that were expressed.
අද සාකච්ඡා කරන ආයතන වලට
The Supreme Court, judges of higher courts, Public Services Commission, Judicial Services Commission, National Police Commission, Administrative Appeals Tribunal, Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption, and the National Finance Commission functioned independently in the past. Under the 19th Amendment, the approval of the Constitutional Council was required to appoint members to these bodies. However, today, these entities have fallen under the purview of the President. Can they function independently? Shirani Bandaranayake was impeached after she had issued a verdict against the previous tenure of this government over the Divinaguma case.
අග්‍රවිශ්වකාර ධූරයෙන් ඉවත් කෙරුවා. ඒක අපි ඉවත් කෙරුවේ ව්‍යවස්ථා අනුව පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ.
The impeachment was done in keeping with the constitution. We continue to uphold that the procedure was correct. However, your administration demanded the resignation of a Chief Justice by threatening to remove him from the position. This was how the previous government acted in an undemocratic fashion. We continue to uphold that the impeachment of the Chief Justice was constitutional.
මේ අයින් කරපු එක අදටත් අපි කියනවා නිවැරදි ව්‍යවස්ථානුකූලව කෙරුවේ කියලා. මම මේ කතා කරන්නේ මේ
I am not aware of incidents that took place beyond the legal framework. It may be true or false. The President is allowed to make 75 appointments under the Constitution, including the Prime Minister, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, Supreme Court judges, Chairman of the National Elections Commission and the Auditor General.
Auditor General 70 පත් කරන්නේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා. ඒක හරියද?
මම ව්‍යවස්ථා මණ්ඩලය
I am a person who represented the Constitutional Council. I wish to state that I did not make independent decisions. The decisions were made upon agreements between the government and Sambandhan, who was opposition leader under the previous administration. The 19th Amendment is a failure.
ඒ 19 සංශෝධනය ෆේල් ඇත්ත වශයෙන්. ෆයිබර් ඔප්ටික් තාක්ෂණය ගෙනල්ලා
The fiber optic technology was introduced to the country under our government. It was I who proposed the idea of distributing tabs among school students to the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. These projects were implemented with the assistance of the Microsoft company. We established a transparent process that did not encourage any form of irregularities. However, these projects failed after they were assigned to the Education Ministry. There are dealmakers in both camps. Some individuals looted state coffers in our camp as well. It is the innocent children who are facing the brunt of these activities. I wish to state that the President is capable of carrying out a digital revolution in the country. That's because he is the leader of the country and the cabinet. I am requesting the President to establish a digital task force for this purpose. He might fail on certain occasions due to the bad influence of those around him, just like students fail exams without engaging in fruitful night studies. However, students can repeat exams and even gain admission to universities. The President needs to exercise his duties intelligently instead of listening to the corrupt owners of some television channels. People like Mahinda Samarasinghe are genuine people.
හොඳ බුද්ධිමත් පිරිසක් අරගෙන කරේ මහින්ද සමරසිංහ කියන මහත්තුමාලා හොඳ අවංක මිනිස්සු.
ඔබතුමා කියන්නේ ඔබතුමා ෆේල්
You are implying that you failed due to the former minister and Akhil Viraj Kariwasam. I would have appreciated if you had exposed the irregularities of the TAP project when you were in the government. People who were involved in failed loan projects are now encouraging the president to carry out a digital revolution. Some are trying to create an impression that the Defence Ministry has received a lion's share of the budget. However, the allocation for the ministry also includes expenses for disaster management, home affairs, protection of archaeological sites, and also the welfare of the military. It is against this backdrop that the opposition is claiming that the Defence Ministry has been allocated funds that are more in value than the period of the war.
ආරක්ෂක අමාත්‍යාංශයට යුද්ධ කාලයටත් වඩා මුදල් වෙන් කරලා කියලා. අපනයනයන් වැඩි කරන්න නම්
Dedicated ministries are required to increase exports and to attract more investment to the country. There are individuals in the backbenches of the government such as SB Dissanayake and Mahinda Samarasinghe who are capable of handling these subjects. Some are under the impression that people who entered parliament through the Viatmaga movement are the skilled individuals in the government. However, people have realized that it is not the case. It was SP Dissanayake who created a revolution by introducing the Samurdhi program in the country after the Janasavya project, but he is in the backbench. This is the same fate that befalls any skilled person in the government. They are sidelined immediately. It is the weak who are afraid of capable individuals. If the president is a skilled individual, he must give opportunities for other skilled politicians in his camp. The budget for next year has given priority to the Rajapaksha cluster and its associates. People in the likes of SB Dissanayake and Mahinda Samarasinghe and Anura Priyadarshana Yapa have been isolated, while individuals such as Susil Premajayantha have been treated similar to those undergoing quarantine. It is the unskilled associates of the Rajapaksha cluster who are benefiting at present.
PCR වල ගෙන්නන්න ඩීල් දාන්න ඒ සේරම දීලා තිනා ළඟට 1988
In 1988, during the presidential election, a mass murder took place in the Valapane electorate. It was carried out by the Patriotic People's Organization. Taking on that responsibility, the Patriotic People's Organization and the JVP even put up signs. For that, our Sri Lanka Freedom Party organizer, Secretary of the Electoral Committee, Chairman and Secretary of the Youth and Teachers Movement were all arrested. Our former president, as the first step in granting them a pardon, their death sentence was removed. I request the officials of the Presidential Secretariat to take the necessary steps to release them. We also have a special request regarding Duminda Silva. We ask that attention be drawn to that too.
ඒක ගැන විශේෂ අවධානය යොමු කරන්න කියලා මම කියන්න කැමතියි.
අපේ රටේ දේශපාලන සංස්කෘතිය වෙනස් වීම.
The president spoke about the change in our country's politics as well as the political culture before and after the election. They said the appointments of state organizations will be made after obtaining approval of the committee. But is that how it happened? The chairman of the Central Environmental Authority, S. Amrasinghe, was the buddy candidate at the last election. The chairman of the National Housing Development Authority was an administrative secretary at the Nelum Mawatha office. Were these people chosen by committees? The chairman of the Provincial Road Development Authority is a former member of the Western Provincial Council. Therefore, if the president spoke of some culture change during his reign, that has not been the case. He also said that relationships will be considered when making appointments to state organizations. In the Civil Aviation Authority, whose father-in-law is Tilak Veerasinghe, whose mother-in-law is Deirdre de Oliveira, who is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Is he not a close relative? So then, the President's statement regarding this has also proven to be nothing but empty words.
සංස්කෘතිය වෙනස් කිරීම සඳහා ඥාතීත්වය පිළිබඳ කරන ලද ප්‍රකාශات හිස් වචන බවට පත් වී තිබෙනවා. ඊළඟ ඔහු
A group of United National Party representatives have submitted a written request to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe to the national list seat secured by the UNP.
A discussion attended by a group of former UNP parliamentarians was held at the party headquarters in Sirikota today. The request to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe for the national list seat was submitted during the meeting.
Everyone signed a request and submitted it to the party. We are asking for Ranil Wickremesinghe to represent the country and party in parliament. We will be able to decide by next week. I think a lot of people know that at a time when the economy of the country is in shambles, Ranil Wickremesinghe is the best person with the knowledge of how to fix it. We requested him to take the national list seat in parliament, but he was unwilling. Today, the former MPs of the United National Party met and requested him to represent us in parliament and support in our efforts to revive the country.
අවස්ථාව අරගෙන මේ රටේ තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නට මුහුණ දෙන්න එතුමාට සහයෝගය ලැබලා දෙන්න කියලා. ඒ කියන්නේ රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ මහත්මයාත් මේකට එකගයි මේ වෙද්දී. එතුමාගේ කර්තව්‍යයක් නේ අපි එතුමාව තල්ලු කරන එතනට යන්න කියලා. ඒ කියන්නේ එතුමා යයි. දන්නේ නැහැ බලන්න.
නායකතුමාව කට්ටිය කිව්වා එයා සුසුයි කියලා.
ඔබතුමා නේද එන්න ඕන කියලා ඔබතුමා
නිත්‍යානුකූල බැලුවොත් මම තමයි එන්න ඕනේ. නායකතුමාම කිව්වා ඡන්දෙ ඉඳලා පරිත්‍යාගයට එයා ඒක දෙන්නේ නැහැ කියලා.
නායකතුමාත් පරාදයිනේ.
ඉතින් ඒක මන් දන්නේ එයාගෙන් අහන්න.
නෑ ඔබතුමාට ඇත්තටම දෙන්න ඕන කියලා සමාජයේ මතයක් තිබුණා.
ඔව් තාම මේ මතේ තියෙනවා. ඉතින් නායකතුමා කිව්වා එයා ගන්න කැමති නැහැ කියලා. ටික කාලයකට හරි මම කිව්වා මට දෙනවා නම් මම අරගෙන කරලා ඊට පස්සේ එයාට ගන්න කියලා. මම නම් කියන්නේ ඡන්දෙ ඉවරෙච්ච ගමන් ඕක කරලා ඉවර කෙරුවා නම් ඉවරයි.
ඔබතුමා කියන්නේ ඔබතුමායි තව කවුද ඉන්නේ සුසු?
වෙන කවුරුත් නැහැ මම නෑ ජ්‍යෙෂ්ඨ මන්ත්‍රීවරයා මම තමයි ලයිස්ට්ේ පළවෙනියට ඉන්නේ මම ඡන්දෙ ඉල්ලුවෙත් නෑ ඡන්ද පළතුරෙත් නෑ
අපි මූණව බලන්නේ නැතුව අහකබල
කවුද
රණතුංග
අපේ නායකතුමා ප්‍රකාශ කළා එතුමා එතෙන්ට යන්නේ නැහැ.
Our leader said that he does not want the seat. He informed us that he will take steps to send a young MP to parliament.
ඉදිරියේදී යවන්න සැලසුම් කරනවායි කියන එක තමයි එතුමා දැනුවත් කරේ.
නෑ නෑ එහෙම දෙයක් එතුමා කිව්වේ නෑ. එතුමාට මං කිව්වා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ආයිතුයි කියලා. රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ මහත්මයා හැර වෙන කෙනෙක් බාර නොගත යුතුයි මේ වෙලාවේ.
නායකතුමා තමයි සුදුසු. නායකතුමා යන්නේ නැත්නම් ඊළඟට ආයුත්තේ නියෝජ්‍ය නායකතුමා.
නායකතුමා ගැන තාමත් අදහස.
The leader has not yet expressed his stance on the matter. He was of the opinion that he should not go to parliament through the national list, but former MPs of the UNP have requested him to take the seat. The leader said that he will consider all of this and reach a decision.
Ranil Wickremesinghe mahathaya.
Should we speak specially about the work done by Ranil Wickremesinghe? The person who did not allow others to work for 4.5 years, destroyed the democratic force and the government. He was finally sent home by the people. Even after he was sent home, he is trying to come in through the back door. These people have to understand that the reason they lost is this very person. At least now, if he decides to stay at home, people will have some sympathy. Governments can be overthrown and governments can be defeated, but people cannot keep this person at home. There is no defeat. He says he is coming forward to speak for the country. He is not coming forward to the country at the moment. This is a government ploy. He has been brought in to carry out government's contract.
මේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී කඳවුරා ඉදිය කරන්න මේ ආණ්ඩුවේ පිල්ලිහක් මේ ආණ්ඩුවේ කොන්ත්‍රාත් එකට.
Meanwhile, Akhila Viraj Karyawasam has resigned from the post of General Secretary of the United National Party. During an inquiry from Newsfirst, Akhila Viraj Karyawasam said his letter of resignation was handed over to party leader Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Meanwhile, the resignation of the party's General Secretary was explained at a media briefing held at Sirikota today.
The General Secretary said that he is prepared to leave his position at any point the party goes through a restructuring. However, our party leader disagreed to accept his letter of resignation and said he does not have to make such a decision right now. As far as I know, such a thing has not been informed in writing.
Schools were reopened for students from grade 6 to 13 today, except in the Western Province and in the areas that are currently under isolation. More than 5,000 schools reopened for their third terms in compliance with health guidelines today. However, a poor student turnout had been recorded at schools in the districts of Kandy, Hambantota, Galle, Mathura and Trincomalee. Our cameras captured how some buses had not been transporting students in line with health directives. Despite a drop in student turnout, our correspondents reported that the turnout of academic and non-academic staff was at high levels. Meanwhile, schools in Hatton only reopened for the students of grade 10 and 13 today. 2 schools in the Hatton Valley estate remained closed after 3 area residents tested positive for COVID-19. Public health inspectors closed down the Bulankulama College in Anuradhapura after a 79-year-old resident had tested positive for the virus.
ගුරුවරු ගෙදරට ගෙල්ලව ගන්න අපිට එහෙම වත්කමක් නැහැ. හොදගෙන යන්න එකක් නැහැ. අඩුම ගානේ අර මෙව ටිකක්වත් නැහැ. අපේ දරුවෙක් විපතකට පත් වෙලා දරුවා ජීවිත හානියක් වුණොත් ලේකම්තුමා කොහොමද අපිට දරුවා දෙන්නේ?
A tense situation arose opposite the Pothane Gama Vidyalaya in Anuradhapura that has a capacity of around 300 students. This was after health guidelines had not been duly followed at the premises. Parents insisted that they would not send their children to school until the health guidelines are followed. However, the Secretary to the Education Ministry yesterday said that funds would be dispersed for the maintenance of sick rooms at schools and to purchase hand sanitizers and thermometers.
We hope to disburse 105.8 million rupees to the schools in all 9 provinces based on the student population. We have handed out 65% of this allocation to schools that are not in the Western Province and isolated areas. Schools with less than 100 students will be granted 8,000 rupees, while schools with a student capacity between 101 and 200 will be granted 10,000 rupees. If the student capacity exceeds 201, that school will receive 12,000 rupees. We must observe a low turnout of students. The Education Ministry has not ruled out the possibility of a COVID-19 spread in schools. The funds that are supposed to be dispersed among schools has been limited to the paperwork. Schools have not been granted thermometers. Rural schools do not have sufficient funds. The people have been deceived. Against this backdrop, they have entrusted principals with the responsibility of running schools. If this continues to take place, teachers and principals will withdraw from their services.
As the Secretary of the Ministry, which responsibility is he accepting? If a student contracts COVID-19, is that a responsibility? There are fewer than 100 students at the Galle Richmond College. Ripon Girls College had 80 students. Sylvester College had 73. Pushpadana Girls College has 12, Vidyartha College is 96. In this manner, around 5,000 schools in the country have less than 100 students in school. Under this situation, what a waste of teaching resources is this? On the other hand, all teachers have been called to schools. If a sense of trust was established among the parents, this situation wouldn't have arisen. Today, even with the schools reopening, the ministry has not decided what to do with the teachers. Why are they playing with the teachers' lives like this? Although the trade unions warn the ministry that there is a possibility of a school cluster being created with the spread of this virus, everyone turned deaf ear to it and went ahead with their unfair decision. Accordingly, the people of the country have delivered a blow to you, Professor. We emphasize that the immediate action needs to be taken to secure the environment and proceed without creating a COVID-19 school cluster.
පාසල්වල පරිසරය සුරක්ෂිත කරලා වගකීම් සහිතව මේ කාර්ය ආරම්භ කරන්නටයි කියන්නේ.
විදුහල්පතිවරු එක්ක සාකච්ඡා කළේ නැහැ.
They did not discuss with the principals. A virtual meeting was held with the principals of the Western Province, and the secretary of the ministry put up a condition asking principals not to ask any questions, which means the principals' opinions were not taken into consideration when making this decision. This is how the ministry is behaving now, and the parents have sent a message to the ministry that they have no faith in their proceedings.
දෙමව්පියෝ ඔබ කෙරෙහි ඔවුන්ට විශ්වාසයක් නැහැ කියලා පණිවිඩයක් දීලා තියෙනවා. කරුණාකරලා තේරුම් ගන්න මේ පණිවිඩය.
We faced a very similar situation when deciding whether we should hold the GCE advanced level examination or not. But today many commend the government's decision. Going for a lockdown is the easiest thing to do, but a lockdown will negatively impact our children. Even if we do consider a lockdown, for how long can we follow such an approach?
අමුතුවල ඔබතුමාලා ලක්ෂ 370ක් වෙන් කරලා තියෙන මේ සඳහා පාසල් තියෙනවා 10400ක්. අමුතු දෙක පාසලකට රුපියල් 3500ක් වගේ මුදලක් තමයි ලැබෙන්නේ. මේක
නේ ඒ ගණිතේ සම්පූර්ණයෙන් වැරදිනේ. 10100 ගාන අද පටන් ගත්තේ නෑනේ.
තියෙන්නේ පාසල් කීයක් කියලා
ඔය දල වශයෙන් 5300ක් ඇතුළේ.
ඒවත් රුපියල් 7400ක් වගේ මුදලක් තමයි වෙන්නේ.
ඔය නෑ
Your assumption is wrong. Equipment purchased previously are still available at some schools. They do not have to purchase anything new.
සිංක් එක තියෙනවා, ඒ යවපු අනිත් උපකරණ තියෙනවා, ඒවා පාසල් තියෙනවා. ඒක අලුතෙන් ඔක්කොම ගන්න අවශ්‍යතාවයක් නැහැ.
අපි ඉතා ඕනෑකමින් ගුරුවරුන්ගෙන් දරුවන්ගෙන් සහ දෙමාපියන්ගෙන්.
With the reopening of schools, we urge all teachers, children and parents to adhere to the health guidelines. We cannot allow the pandemic to obstruct the education system in the long run. We must learn to live with this health crisis for the next few years. On one hand, we must prevent this virus from spreading, and on the other hand, we must ensure the continuity of the education sector. Therefore, we urge all sectors to follow the instructions given by the health authorities.
ඒ සඳහා මේ සෞඛ්‍ය උපදෙස් වලට දැඩි අවධානයක් යොමු කරන්න කියලා අපි සියලු පාර්ශ්වයන්ගෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා.
Meanwhile, 204 new COVID-19 cases were identified this evening. Accordingly, the total number of COVID-19 cases reported in the country rose to 20,375. 5,791 patients are currently receiving treatment at hospitals island-wide. Meanwhile, 428 COVID-19 patients recovered today. Accordingly, the total number of patients who recovered from the virus stands at 14,497. No deaths due to COVID-19 were reported within the day, and the current death toll from COVID-19 stands at 87.
අද දිනේ වෙන විට රෝගීන් 6703ක් අඳන් මේ වෙනකොට උපයෝගී කරගෙන තියෙනවා රෝගී සත්කාර සඳහා.
As of today, 6,703 beds have been used for the treatment of patients. Accordingly, 2,428 beds have been reserved to be used at any occasion. Only 5 beds have been used now from the 148 beds at the 15 intensive care units, which everyone is talking about. That is the situation now. Additionally, 10,679 PCR tests have been conducted in the past 24 hours.
ඔගේ පැය 24 තුල 10679ක් පරීක්ෂණ කරලා තියෙනවා. ඊයේ දවස්වලදී අපේ
Yesterday we recorded deaths of 4 patients. We must clearly state that these deaths reported have not all taken place on the day they were reported. In some instances, the PCR test is conducted after death. The cause of death will be determined by conducting all the necessary tests only after receiving the PCR test results. The Registrar General's office has issued a circular stating that the cause of death has to be determined following the PCR tests. Medically and epidemiologically, we are under the stance that this should not apply to all deaths in the country. Accordingly, the Director of Health Services has issued recommendations on when the PCR tests should be conducted upon death. An inmate at the Mahara prison died upon admission to the Ragama Teaching Hospital yesterday. The post-mortem will be conducted today, and then we can identify if it is a case of COVID-19 and to which extent the virus played a part in the death.
ඒ තුලින් අපිට බලා ගන්න පුළුවන් COVID-19 ආසාදිතේ ඒ ආසාදනය කොයිතරම් දුරට මේ මරණයට හේතු වුණාද කියලා.
Several areas were removed from the list of isolated areas today. Accordingly, Borella, Vallampitiya, Colombo Fort and Slave Island were released from the list of isolated areas at 5 a.m. this morning. However, the Vanathamulla Grama Seva division that comes under the Borella police jurisdiction and the Wakanda Grama Seva division of Slave Island will remain isolated until further notice. Mattakuliya, Modara, Buendol, Kotahena, Grand Pass, Foreshore, Adurupu Street, Maligavatta, Dematagoda, Keselvatta, Maradana, Peta and Dam Street police jurisdictions in the Colombo district will continue to remain isolated. Meanwhile, the isolation status of Jayala and Kadavata was released at 5 a.m. today. However, Nigambo, Ragama, Vattala, Paliyagoda, Kalaniya and 7 Grama Seva divisions of Bandaragama in the Kalutara district remain isolated. The Sri Lanka Air Force carried out an aerial surveillance operation on the Atalugama village today.
බොහෝ අවස්ථාවලදී හුදකලා කරන ලද ප්‍රදේශවල ජනතාව විමසන්නේ අපේ ප්‍රදේශය කවද්ද හුදකලා බවින් මුදා හරින්නේ කියලා.
Locals in the isolated areas ask us when the isolation will be lifted. The answer to their question depends on their behavior. If they restrict travel and minimize the number of cases detected from the area, we could release them from isolation. We know the people are inconvenienced. The government is trying its best to address this issue. We urge the public to adhere to health guidelines.
ප්‍රතිසම්පාදනය කරන්න කෙසේ වෙතත් ඒ අතරතුර ඔබ නිරන්තරයෙන් සෞඛ්‍ය පුරුදු අනුගමනය කරමින් සිටින්න නිරන්තරයෙන් සංචාරණය සීමා කරන්න.
George Stewart Health Private Limited had obtained an ex parte enjoining order against MTV Channel Private Limited, preventing it from making public any defamatory content against George Stewart Health Private Limited and its chairman or key employees. This is in connection with Newsfirst reportage on the importation of rapid antigen test kits to Sri Lanka. According to the plaintiff filed, the plaintiff had valued the action at Rs 2 billion for the purpose of stamp duty. This enjoining order will be in effect until the 7th of December.
The Colombo High Court lifted the overseas travel ban imposed on former Minister Basil Rajapaksa today.
Basil Rajapaksa is the first accused in the case filed under 5 separate indictments for the criminal misappropriation of Rs 2.991 billion from the Divinaguma Development Department for the distribution of steel roofing sheets to Divinaguma beneficiaries. When he was released on bail, an order was made for Rajapaksa to appear at the Criminal Investigations Department every 3 months, and this bail condition was also removed by Colombo High Court Judge R. Gurusinghe. Attorneys led by the President's Counsel Gamini Marapana, appearing for Basil Rajapaksa, filed submissions seeking for the acquittal and release of Rajapaksa and the other accused, citing the evidence examination of the prosecution in the case filed by the Attorney General had concluded. They sought the acquittal and release of Rajapaksa and other accused without calling for evidence from the defence. The case will be called up again on the 25th of November.
Let's remind ourselves of the investigations into irregular transactions at the Colombo Stock Exchange between 2010 and 2014. The Bribery Commission, the Police FCID, and the Securities and Exchange Commission spearheaded separate investigations into these transactions. Though legal action was taken on certain transactions, the perpetrators remain at large. On the 17th of March 2015, former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe told Parliament that investigations were taking place on several companies for amassing massive profits through insider trading at the Colombo Stock Exchange. The Colombo Land and Development Company and Reef Comber are 2 entities that the former Prime Minister singled out. The Reef Comber Company, which Wickremesinghe referred to, had at the time changed its name to Citrus Leisure. Following a media expose in May 2015, a lot more details into this white-collar crime began to surface. For instance, in 2010, the price of Citrus Leisure shares in the 1-month period from the 1st of October to the 2nd of November was around the 20 rupee mark. However, between the 2nd and the 9th of November, the share price skyrocketed by 255%. In 2012, the price of a Citrus Leisure share stood at 2 rupees on the 6th of June, and by the 20th of June, just 2 weeks later, increased to 8 rupees. That's 300%. By the 19th of May 2015, these shares stood at 10 cents and today trades at around 9 rupees. Finance experts, stock market analysts, as well as investigators pointed out that the prices of shares were artificially pumped and then dumped so that a close circle were able to make unconscionable profits, while small-time investors and funds that represented the public, such as the EPF, faced a disaster. Indrani Sugadadasa, a reputed state official, as well as respected professional Tilak Karunaratne, were compelled to leave the post of the chair at the Securities and Exchange Commission for reasons perhaps best known by the inside traders themselves. In fact, rather than appointing reputed public servants, individuals who were involved in the very transactions that ravaged small-time investors and the EPF were appointed as chair at the SEC. There can be various tactics and strategies employed to evade these allegations, to cover up tracks. But there are two things that those who steal the people's money can never evade: the power of the truth and the long arc of justice. Their own conscience will tell them that.
In international news, the G20 summit concluded yesterday, shedding light on the fight against the coronavirus and the dire predictions of the fate of the world economy in its aftermath.
The G20 Riyadh summit for the year 2020 was the 15th meeting of the Group of 20, which was initially scheduled to take place in Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, from the 21st to the 22nd of November 2020. However, the COVID-19 pandemic forced the summit to be held virtually, hosted by its current presidency, Saudi Arabia. At the conclusion of the summit, member nations highlighted the need for overall effectiveness in coordinating and supporting the global response to the pandemic and the central efforts of the member states. Among the closing statements of the G20 summit, attention was also drawn to other areas, calling climate change one of the most pressing challenges of our time and saying that the Financial Stability Board, a group of international regulators, was continuing to examine the financial stability implications of the issue. The summit drew its attention to the statistics recently produced by the IMF, who projected last month that the global economy would contract 4.4% in 2020 and that the recovery would be long, uneven and uncertain. Poor countries have been particularly vulnerable to the effects of the virus. The World Bank estimated in October that the pandemic could push more than 100 million people into extreme poverty this year. One of the highlights of the summit was the indifference from the incumbent President of the United States, Donald Trump, who continued to show defiance against the efforts of the G20 leaders, reminding the country's formal withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and the threat to cut off funding to the WHO. However, the President-elect Joe Biden promised to reset the steps taken by President Trump.
The Ministry of Health said that the LPL cricket tournament will be held from the 26th of this month until the 16th of December, and the England cricket tour, which is scheduled to commence on the 14th of January, will be held in accordance with health guidelines.
A statement issued by the Ministry of Health said that a special discussion was held at the Ministry of Health this morning under the patronage of Health Minister Pavitra Wanniyarachchi to decide on how the competitions should be held. The Ministry of Health and Sri Lanka Cricket has agreed to hold the tournament following a series of guidelines prepared on the recommendations of the COVID-19 Technical Committee of the Ministry of Health. Director General of Health Asela Gunawardena and Chief Executive Officer of Sri Lanka Cricket Ashley De Silva also participated in the discussion. Meanwhile, a group of Sri Lankan players who joined the training camp at Pallekele have now arrived in Hambantota. Training went very well these 10 days. We trained. It ended yesterday. From that bubble, the whole team came straight to the Hambantota LPL bubble. This is a great opportunity for our young players because they are experienced players. This is important for us.
දේවල් රාශියක් තියෙනවා අපේ ලංකා ක්‍රිකට් වලට. සෞඛ්‍ය අංශයේ සියලුම නිලධාරීන්ටත් ඒ වගේම ත්‍රිවිධ හමුදාව පොලිසිය.
This tournament is going to be held with the full efforts of all the officers in the health sector as well as the 3 armed forces and the police. This is a catastrophe that affects not only us but the whole world. I think holding a tournament of this nature at a time like this is a good thing for the whole country and the world as well, because our cricket fans can watch matches these days.
ක්‍රිකට් ප්‍රේක්ෂකයන්ට තරඟ බැලීමේ හැකියාව උන්ට තියෙනවා මේ කාලේ.
And that's a wrap of Primetime News for tonight. For the News First team, I'm Dasni Athada, along with our interpreter Brian De Cruz, reminding you to stay safe and be responsible. Good night.